Hi, I'm Nikki Lunsford, working on the project to see how the economics have changed in Muncie and how that's been impacted on the churches and the church's role as it's raised itself as we look at history at this time. Today is May 2nd, 2017, and we find ourselves in the lovely sanctuary of High Street United Methodist Church in downtown Muncie. Sitting with me today is Pastor Charlotte Overmyer, a friend and a longtime community member, who is the Visitation Pastor for High Street United Methodist, and she has a lot to share with us today. So Charlotte,
Yes.
tell us about your faith journey and how you became a pastor.
I have a unique story, but I suppose we all do, and feel so blessed to have entered the ministry when I was 50 years old. When I was 16, I'd say, at church camp, I felt the call to ministry so profoundly. I honestly can say it was though a rope were around my waist and I was pulled forward. But what did a woman do with such a call in the 60s? There were women pastors in the United Methodist Church, but I didn't know any. It was early on in ordaining women. The only women pastors I knew were of a more Pentecostal background to which I couldn't relate. I felt the only thing I could imagine was going to Africa as a missionary, and that didn't seem right. And so I ignored that call. When my children were small, I remember sensing that call again so strongly, and I was leading Bible studies. I was doing things in the church, but couldn't imagine with 3 little girls going back to school. So I started working with older adults in a downtown facility, and then I came on staff at High Street Church in 1995 as director of older adult ministries. My training's in English and speech. I had taught at one time. So I came here and directed the older adult ministry program. And the senior pastor, after observing me for a little while, said, "Charlotte, have you ever thought of going into ministry?" My first answer was no. And I went back in, I said, I didn't answer that right, but I think I had pushed that away for so long. I said, but I'm 50, and what can I do? I'm going to be 50 in February. What can I do with a call to ministry? So we're fortunate in the United Methodist Church to have a program that is called a local pastor, which meant that I didn't go to seminary. I'm not fully ordained. But for 8 summers, I took classes, mostly at the Appalachian Local Pastors School in Kentucky, which was a wonderful experience for me. It's an extension school of Candler School of Theology at Emory University. So I went there every May and took classes, and was right away able to after a short training time, to become a local pastor. I can, as long as I'm under appointment by our bishop, I can do the sacraments and anything else an ordained pastor can do, but only at the local church to which I'm appointed. Oh. And so that's what I've been doing for 21 years. It'll be 21 years in October. So over 20 years I've been a local pastor here at High Street Church. I was raised in the Methodist Church. I was blessed to have a wonderful background in that. Came to Muncie and became a part of High Street Church. So again, for a Methodist pastor, my story's unique because I stayed in the same church.
Right.
So I stayed here after I was appointed, and was appointed then specifically to do older adult ministries. And that's always been my passion, to work with older adults. So when I was full-time at the church, I was doing the visitation, but I also directed the older adult programs, Update Learning and Thursday Luncheon, and was the advocate for the older adults in the church. Then 6 years ago this summer, I retired from full-time ministry and just kept that piece of visitation. We have almost 100 members whom I have on my list to visit. We have 50 members approximately who are 90 years or more, up to 102 years old.
Oh my.
And I love their stories. My daughters will say, "Oh, there goes mom with another old person story." But I have heard stories that are just the most wonderful stories.
Do you write them down?
Folks. I have several of them written down. And I preach a lot of funerals because I call on the people who are at the end of their lives, and I get to tell their stories. And I just tell one that always sticks with me, a lady who lived to be 104, and her grandfather had a livery stable in Fairmount, about 20 minutes north of here. And when Abraham Lincoln was shot, he got on his stagecoach and rode this part of Indiana telling people the president had been shot. And she knew him. She knew her grandfather. So I knew a woman who knew them, whose grandfather that she knew got on that stagecoach. And she gave me a picture of that stagecoach that he used to tell the story that Abraham Lincoln had died. So I have lots of those stories.
That's fun. And unlike many Methodist churches, then, you've been stability as pastors have come and gone?
Yes, and that seems to fit me to stay and be here as changes happen. Lots of the senior pastors change, the other associates change, and I've been blessed to stay, and I have. Our senior pastor now, Dale Mendenhall, says I have the institutional memory.
That's true.
That I know how we got here. I try my very best not to say we've always done it this way, we need to do it this way. But if you don't know where you've been and how you've gotten to where you are, it's harder to plan where you're going next. So I try to provide that institutional memory.
That's awesome. And I think you said that Dale has been here 7 years.
Dale's been here as senior pastor 7 years, and he's retiring this July 1st. And our new pastor who's coming is Stacy Fisher-Gehring, coming from Bloomington. She's been the associate pastor at First Church Bloomington. So she will be coming as our senior pastor. Sherry Drake is the full-time associate pastor, and she's been here, I believe, 3 years now. And I will still be here. My 10 hours as visitation pastor. So we will be a staff of 3 women. And we're looking forward to working with Stacy. She's younger. She brings a different background, has a young family. It's been a long time since our senior pastor had a young family. So we look forward to working with Stacy. Dale has had an interesting story in that he served as an associate pastor here over 30 years ago. He came here in 1978, 79, and served as an associate pastor here for a short time, then came back all these years later as our senior pastor. So he has brought some of that, also that connectedness to the past.
And I thought it was interesting that before we started the interview, you mentioned how many churches were led by women in Muncie.
When Stacy comes to High Street, that will be the 3 largest United Methodist churches within the city proper will have senior pastors who are women. Vicki Perkins is at the Garden at Gethsemane. Lisa Schubert-Noling is at College Avenue, and Stacy will be here at High Street.
And I believe that Vicki at Gethsemane is more our age, but Lisa's also young, with young family.
Lisa has a baby, a year old, and Stacy has daughters who are 6 and 8. So that's just the new trend.
Just kind of out there, do you see that as a trend, more female pastors, less men getting into the call?
I think I've heard that seminaries are about half and half now in United Methodist seminaries. I'm still disappointed. I learned this week that one of the churches, a fairly large church in another county where some of my family attends, are getting a woman pastor, and it's a United Methodist church, but they're having a hard time. One family's already left the church because it's a woman pastor. That bothers me.
It does. It does. So what do you see as your main responsibilities as visitation pastor?
I have the best job in the church.
You do say so.
I'm blessed. I call on those members who are homebound, whether sometimes it's temporary, they've had a major surgery and they're homebound for a while, or those who are in their own homes, those who are in nursing homes. I keep all the folks who are 90 or more on my list and at least visit them on their birthdays, even if they're out and about. I try to go on their birthdays. I'm the liaison with any extended care facility, the nursing homes in town. Westminster Village. I occasionally lead Vespers there. Our women's group, our United Methodist women, go every other month to Westminster and have a Friday morning coffee and a program, and I work to coordinate that. Our United Methodist home at Warren, which is Heritage Point, we go there twice a year and stay in contact with our folks from here who live there. We take refreshments and go up and see them twice a year. So I'm the advocate, the liaison for our older folks. Now, we do have an older adult, director of older adult ministries, Sandra Hardcastle, who now directs Update Learning and Thursday Luncheon and leads our grief group, which are things that I did when I was full-time. So we still have that position as well.
Do you deal with the families? Are there families
Yes.
here? For the most part, the aging population that you get to love, are there children here, or are they far away? How do you see that happening now?
Both. There are some who are far away with whom I correspond. I'll
Okay.
get emails, could you check on this or that? And others that the families are right here. But I do get to know the families. Again, I visited some folks so long that I know their children. One lady who passed away in the last week, I had been with her when her husband died. I know their children by their first names. I am with them. I do informal counseling, that kind of thing. A son, a daughter will say, I'm having trouble with mom, I don't know what choices to make, and they come in and we sit and talk, and I try to help direct those. So I've done, I worked for 13 years at Alpha Center, which is an adult daycare center for the frail elderly, what the title was for it then. And when I worked there, we had a group called Children of Aging Parents, and I'd like to do that again sometime, but I do that informally.
Mm-hmm. That's a ministry all in itself. Your focus is on the elderly,
But helping the children deal with that. We want so much to give those older folks dignity. And I
Yes.
don't like it when children say, now I'm parenting my parent. No, you're not. Your parent is still your parent, but they require some care and some direction that is unique.
how would you characterize the condition of the church community? The people that come into this church regularly, your membership, is it declining? Is it increasing? Is it thriving, struggling? What are your
Probably all of the
numbers?
above. Our numbers are steady. We declined 1% last year in membership, so that's not anything drastic. We're not, as most mainline churches, we aren't where we were 2 decades ago. Numbers change, so our numbers are down from then. And from Sunday to Sunday, no, our numbers aren't as large. Part of that is, when I was growing up, if you asked me if I went to church regularly, and I said yes, that would mean I was there every Sunday, with rare exception. If you ask people today, do you go to church regularly? And they answer yes. Studies show that may mean they go once a month, maybe twice. Regular doesn't mean every Sunday anymore. And so you're seeing folks over the course of a month, you're seeing good numbers in the church. But if you look at every Sunday's numbers, which is a very interesting,
That would be.
it's part of our society today. So I think we struggle. We struggle. I'd be wrong if I didn't say that. But I feel like we're a healthy congregation. There's many things happening in the life of this church, in any week and any day, that we're still a 7-day-a-week church.
Would you venture a guess at the average age of your population?
It certainly is older. I don't know the average. I have not. I
Thought
used to
about
do
that?
that. It's been a while since I looked that up, and I didn't see those on some statistics I looked today.
Maybe how many kids are in your children's program? Do we know an average? Guesstimate?
20-some on a Sunday morning over the course of the morning. More, certainly more than that on your, and again, they're not all here at one time. Part of it, we have 3 services. And so you may sit in a service and say, 5 kids went out for children's church. Where are all our children? Well, during the first service, if you have 5 to 10 that go out, the second service is during the Sunday school hour, so then you'll have 15, 20, 25 in Sunday school. And then the third service, you'll have another group go out. You have the nursery that you don't see. So there are more people, more children than you're seeing at any one time. When we occasionally, in the summer, we usually have one large service outside.
Ooh.
And we give the children their 3rd grade Bibles or recognize or have the Bible school kids sing. And every year you have people saying, I had no idea we had that many children in the church. Well, because we don't see them all at once.
Mm-hmm. Can you describe your 3 services, the time, why you chose the time for those services, who's your target audience for those 3 different services, kind of how those evolved?
Originally, of course, we're a large downtown church, as you can see, a formal, as you would, Gothic sanctuary. And so for years, there were 2 traditional services with the organ, the hymns sung from the hymnals, the choir and the pastors wearing robes, the very traditional services. During the pastorate of Tom Rao, he decided to add a 3rd service in the chapel. So that's the service in between the early and the late service. The 3rd service was put in the chapel. It was interesting. The target and what worked out were not the same. The target was thinking that would be where young folks, perhaps college students, would come. The thought was, we won't dress as formally there. The pastor won't wear a robe. We'll do things a little more casual. And we've done those things, but there are young people there, but they're not college students or the really young adults that we had thought would come. It's a very mixed congregation. So the first service is the one remaining very traditional service, and it's beautiful with the organ, the choir in their robes, the pastors in their robes. We sing from hymnals. Now we do project the words on the screen as well. Okay. Some things change. We have a wide variety of music and the liturgy, the responsive readings, the Apostles' Creed is said every Sunday. When we take communion, everybody comes to the front and kneels with the individual cups and bread. That's at 8:30. The relaxed traditional, we call it, is in the chapel at 9:45. That is about a 45-minute service. There's not the responsive readings, there's not the creed, there's the Lord's Prayer. There's special music. Occasionally the choir will sing at the beginning for a special music, but there's not a choir to lead the service. The pastor does not wear a robe. Piano is used in there. And 2 hymns instead of 4 hymns. Communion is passed on the aisle. We take communion twice, every other month. Every second month we take communion. So those things vary, and that congregation, it's almost like its own congregation. It's a little smaller space, though it's as large as some small churches would be. They know each other so well. Some folks go there because the seats are more comfortable, and they're sitting in the pews has gotten hard for them, and they can sit there with arms on their chairs. Other couples go there, young couples, because it is during the Sunday school hour, and their children go to Sunday school. They look out for one another. They know who's not there. They know when the snowbirds come back from Florida. I love preaching in
Very
that
intimate.
group. It's intimate. The singing is wonderful because it's a smaller space. It's still Gothic. It still has the stained glass windows. It has a high ceiling. It's a beautiful service too. The 11 o'clock service is our contemporary service. And it was started maybe 10 years ago. We experimented with it on Saturday night, and then we moved it to Sunday morning. And it is in this sanctuary. And during that service, or as soon as that service is over, there's a half-hour turnaround time. And so the drums are brought in, the guitars are brought in, all of that contemporary music, beautiful music, high-quality music, but contemporary music takes place. The grand piano's moved over here, and Clay Arnett directs our praise team. He plays the piano and directs it, and we have fantastic musicians for that. And that attracts a younger crowd, but not always. There are people in their 80s that's the best time. And my mother-in-law, who's 98, loves that service because she loves watching the young people lead the service. She misses the organ music, but she loves watching the young people. So that's a very, very different service than the other two services.
About how many people in each of those services?
The first service, I would say 150 to 200. The chapel service, that chapel comfortably holds 100. Probably we're at 75 at the contemporary service. Now I haven't looked at the statistics. I'm in all of them, and that's what I see. And of course it varies. Sunday, the contemporary service was very sparse. I just have to say that, it was very sparse. It's not grown like we thought it would grow. I don't know why. That service has a good core group, but it hasn't grown like we wanted it to.
Well, recent research has suggested that most churches are having trouble attracting new members. Has this been the case for here? Have your people shuffled around between the services, or have you actually seen an increase?
We have some new folks. We took in 4 or 5 members recently. We have 3 more coming in. We're having new folks come, but certainly not a large influx. We have lots of folks who come and then they come again, but not joining. There's some influx, but boy, we have people who are loyal to their service who would never switch.
Sure.
Particularly the people who come to the first 2 would not come to the contemporary service.
Mm-hmm.
Contemporary service people are glad to go back and forth, whatever, but the ones who want the traditional have not tried much here. So I think it is very rare there'd be a Sunday without visitors, without new people here.
Mm-hmm. This church has an interesting location, being smack downtown, and it has an interesting history. Can you fill us in a little bit on its
Sure.
history in Muncie?
High Street goes back to the very first gathering of Christians in Muncie town at the courthouse. There was a meeting in 1839, and the very first quarterly meeting of the Methodist Church, and we trace our roots to that, and so we are the oldest church in the city.
Mm-hmm.
There have been 4 buildings. First the Methodist Meeting House, and then Simpson Chapel. Then in 1880, a red brick church was built on this very spot at the corner of High and Adams.
Were the other 2 here also?
No, one was on Mulberry, and the Methodist Meeting House, if I can find those without. If the Methodist Meeting House cost us their annual budget was $435. But I'm not saying the address, but no, they were not on this. The Simpson Chapel was at the corner of Jackson and Mulberry.
Okay, a couple blocks away.
So and the first one was at the corner of Elm and Washington Street.
Oh, okay, that's quite a bit further
So-
away.
And
So then they came here with the red brick building.
Built the red brick church in 1880. It was a magnificent building. It's at one time there was a membership of 1,000 some people. It grew during the gas boom. If you study the history of Muncie, 1880s, 90s, it's such a fast-growing church. And in the late 1920s, the church made a decision, which still I can't fathom, to tear down that magnificent building and build this church on this spot. And when you look at the pictures of that church and what it was, but they just had grown, they had outgrown everything, they couldn't put any more people. And the idea of, I don't know, other churches are being built. Why? Today it would be a church plant, they tore down that church
Oh my.
and met for 2 years in the old Muncie Central across the street. And they sent their pastor to Europe to study Gothic buildings.
Oh, my.
And this church was built
Huh.
in 1930. So it's a very interesting piece. I'll talk in a minute about what happened in 78 when the explosion happened. But after that, when they were looking around in the church, emptying every single corner while it was rebuilt, in the chancel area of the chapel, there are doors that go back to some of the vents, the heating system of the church. And they saw something in there, and they crawled back, and they found these communion tables, portable communion tables. They're like this, and they have legs that fold under them in the most primitive way, and they come down, and then they found boxes of communion cups that are on stems. They're little stemmed cups. The top has a lip on one side of it, so you need to have it turned the right way. But you do, because the tray tables have green felt underneath the wood, and the wood is notched so that each one of those cups would be set in the right place.
Oh, my
And
lands.
nobody knows from whence
When?
they came.
Oh, my.
On it says patent 1880. So my educated guess, with my institutional memory and my reading of the history and in the archives, we can find nothing. I believe when the church was growing that rapidly in the red brick church, they invested in those extra communion tables because there's enough to serve hundreds. And probably put them around the sanctuary and use them, because at that time everybody used individual cups.
Sure.
And then after this church was built, and they didn't need them, they stored them back there, and nobody had ever seen them. We bring them out on Christmas Eve at noon. We have a service in the chapel at noon, and we use those cups. Remember the people who went before us. That made this
Interesting.
possible.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the church was built, and then the Depression hit, and they
Yes.
came back in this building, and they had more chicken and noodle dinners than they could ever count in order to raise the money to pay off the debt, because the Depression hit as this church was coming back in, and so
So the chicken noodle dinners were for the
to pay off the
members
debt.
to collect money to pay. It wasn't to feed the hungry
No,
masses.
no, that was to pay off the debt. And one of the
Okay.
women used to talk about how she felt like for years she had chicken and noodles going down her arm as she had been serving so many.
Oh, my
And the
gosh.
community came in and ate and helped
Yeah.
pay off the debt. And so the church stood on this corner then, I think, from 1939, by the time they were back in, to 1978. Well, it still stands here, but in 1978, in January, during the blizzard, there was an
Yes.
explosion and fire
Yes.
at the church. They were putting in an elevator, and the gas line had somehow been nicked. And with the extreme cold, the gas was coming in at a stronger level. We have long had an apartment in the building where college students live. We call them our church mice. And we had two brothers who were living here at the time. And the city was at a standstill because it was Friday night. And they called the senior pastor and said, "We smell gas very strongly." And he said, "Get out of the building, I'll call the fire department." So they went outside. The police officer came along and said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Well, let's open the door." And they opened these doors at the front of the church, and that caused the air to
caused
come
the
through, and the church
combusted.
exploded. The two boys and the policeman were thrown across the street, completely across the street, but into a snowbank. Nobody was hurt. The one brother would tell about watching his brother fly over there. But the roof of the church went up. Somebody was snowbound in the Ball Building, which is across the street at the time, the Fisher Building, and he saw the roof raised up. The building burned for hours because the fire crews couldn't get here. When they did get here, they had to move all this snow in order to get down to where the line was broken. So it burned for literally hours. So the congregation was out for 2 years. Again, worshipped at Muncie Central, this time the new Muncie Central on North Walnut. Met all over. There were weeks that there were meetings in 14 different churches and homes around the city. Interestingly enough, Dale Mendenhall was the associate who came, and his job was to keep all those ministries going and find places for them all to meet. That's what he did when he came here as a young associate pastor. I remember hearing him preach a sermon called "I Love to Tell the Story," and he loves to tell the story of what High Street did during that time. So we had an office over on Walnut Street for those 2 years, and met everywhere around town. One Maundy Thursday, we didn't know where to have a service because all the Protestant churches had their own services that night, and the senior pastor called the Jewish temple, and we had a service at the Jewish temple that night. So it was quite an experience. Those older adult programs I mentioned continued. They had just started, so Update Learning still met, I think at that time, 8 Mondays twice a year at First Baptist, and First Presbyterian hosted our Thursday luncheon for all that time. So the programs, they didn't just continue, we grew in programming during those 2 years that we were out of the building.
I wonder if that's because you touched people, more people saw you rather than staying in your own little cave.
We were out and about.
Very interesting. And then the rebuilding process after that was pretty phenomenal.
It was. We were out 2 years. When we came in on Miracle Sunday, and $1 million was laid on the altar. And it was debt-free by the time we came back. And there was some insurance settlement, and then the congregation laid $1 million on the altar that Sunday.
Amazing.
And one of the things that happened in that, something, all things work together for good for those who love the Lord. An explosion and fire was not good. But what came out of it, that we now have a church that was brought up to code in 1980. And while we have repairs to make, and it's in many ways still an old church, there are codes that have been met that would not have been met in an old church. And so we are much more accessible than we would have been in many ways. And so we changed some stairways, a lot major things were done. The sanctuary looks the same. There are things that, if you look at old pictures, there are little differences, but for the most part.
But more ramps and...
More ramps, more accessibility.
You got the elevator.
We got the elevator.
Which caused all the problems.
Interesting, when you look at these churches that were built, evidently, if you had a handicapping condition, you stayed home. These old churches we have 5 levels, and none of them was accessible without stairs. And so we now have the elevator. We have, I was showing you in the garden court, we had to make that one level. But even it got to the point just recently where we've added a railing on the chancel area, which you wouldn't notice if you weren't looking for it, because it was difficult for some of our people, particularly in the choir, to get up the stairs of the chancel. And so we added a railing there. But when you think about it, there are a lot of old churches like that.
I think that's part of the adaptation to our current population, which is older. Our lifespan is longer.
Our lifespan's longer, and we're not just staying home. If you have a problem, you just get out and go anyway.
Keep going.
A few years ago, we took out part of the pew on either side so that wheelchairs can sit there.
Yes.
So there's a place for and wheelchairs, and we have a mom with twins that she brings in a stroller, and she sits there with her double stroller.
It works.
So it works, but we're not all one size anymore.
We're not.
Need.
Aside from the membership, what are key challenges facing High Street community?
Well, I suppose one of the things that most of us are facing is the involvement of young families, because they have so many commitments and so many choices. What one pastor friend of mine calls the slippery slope of Sunday soccer.
Yeah.
When
Right.
when I was raising my daughters, there were not school activities on Sunday.
Right.
I never had to choose between church and youth group or a school act. Maybe a personal thing they wanted to do, but
Right.
we weren't leaving as my daughters do. Some, occasionally even missing church, but they try really hard at not doing that. But leaving as soon as school is over to go to a town an hour or two away to play soccer, to be in a baseball league, to
A
be
swim meet,
swim
volleyball,
meets.
whatever
Oh,
it
yes.
is. Do you think it also could be because when, I don't know about you, but I stayed home and raised my kids. So on Sunday, that was my morning to, yes, worship the Lord, but socialize.
And there's just so many other
They
commitments.
all work now.
Right. The families are all, parents are working, whether they're single parents or two-parent families. Everybody's working during the week. And so we're seeing there's it's hard to think. My girls would have a hard time even relating to this, so I stayed home. But it was even, the dads went to work, they came home and they ate supper. When I first was in the church as an adult, evening meetings started at like 7:30.
Yes, they did. Choir
I think
practice,
that's one
7,
change. If
7:30.
you thought about, if you're asking what changes have been, that was, and the dads came home from work and mom had a big meal at the table. They all sat down. Then usually dad, it got to where mom went to the meetings, but she didn't chair them.
Correct.
Went to church to the meeting at 7:30. Now our meetings start at least 7, some 6, some 5:30. They stop on their way home from work and then go on home. I never thought about it before, Nikki, but thinking about that, that was, and I remember being asked, who chairs your committees, and the time when it began to change that the women could even chair trustees and finance and board of and the council meetings, where up until then a woman might chair education or maybe missions, but there were certain roles that only were now.
And the women's circle.
And the women's circle, and that's not, at least not in the United Methodist Church, or not.
Do women's circles even happen anymore?
We do have circles, but many churches don't have it anymore, and that's one group that really struggles because they still see themselves in the model that used to be, and that's not there anymore. There aren't, I mean, as you were saying, I was stay-at-home mom circle was a great thing for me. That was my social outing of the month.
Kids got to play.
Oh,
I
yes.
got to learn a little bit about everything happened in the community, and the Bible was talked about too.
Yes, and so it was a wonderful experience for me. But now there are no circles with young people in them.
No.
We have a one night circle, but even at that, there aren't many of them who are, the young moms have, again,
Way too much on their
practice
plate.
way too many things to get to.
Right.
My daughters are in their early 40s and are all involved in their church, but the two who have families, the one who's 45 said, "Mom, I look around and I think we have an active church, but there's nobody younger than I am."
Right.
And this is an active church, but it's just and it's not that people aren't Christian. I don't believe that.
Right.
But the commitments are so different, and I don't know where we're going. And it'd be interesting when if the Middletown Center does this study in another 10, 20 years, what we'll
What
be
has
saying.
happened? What's evolved? It's an interesting time in our culture. You have an interesting history here at High Street with your community, with your actual members also. You mentioned the gas boom. Did the Ball family come here?
No, but John and Janice Fisher then later did. She was a Ball, but the Balls were Unitarians a lot. I just was reading, and some Presbyterian, but they were Unitarians don't hold me to that.
Right.
But I think that's what I was just reading recently. We had a lot of members, though, who were part of Ball, and when the Ball Corporation moved to Colorado, that did make an impact on us because we had some of the leaders of that.
Yeah, talk about
Industry.
that impact, because when that's an economic change, but we lost a lot of philanthropists and community leaders. How did that impact your church?
That impacted us as well. They had been parts of our church, and that changed. We had a lot of people at High Street who were part of Westinghouse that came from Pennsylvania when Westinghouse was developed here. And we had Ball people, but we really had a core of Westinghouse people that came and became involved in the church. And so many of them were at retirement age when that changed, and they stayed. But you just know that's one of those pieces that you think when the church was growing. So and you know, when people would come to town in that day, if they came for the university or the hospital or whatever, you know, the realtors would ask them, what church do you want to belong to, and help connect them with those churches. And often those leaders were, you know, there were 2 or 3, First Pres, High Street, First Baptist, maybe College Ave, those major churches, and most people who were coming were, you know, fit into those. That's not true anymore. We don't have, we're not denominationally loyal anymore. I'm not saying good or bad, I'm just saying.
That is a change.
We look for a church that fits our needs. Now, some folks, fortunately, look for a church where they can serve. Not their own personal need, but where will we have one couple in the church right now. That's why they're in Muncie. In retirement, they looked for a place where they best could serve.
Well,
And
that's
so they came to Muncie, and fortunately, they're part High Street, and they serve in every way here and in the community. That's what, you know, we're really called to do, not look to where our needs are met, but how we can serve. One of the interesting questions that I was asked when we were doing a retreat, staff retreat of some kind, we had someone come in and lead us. Is Muncie a downtown church, or a church that happens to be downtown?
This one?
Or is High Street?
Is High Street
a downtown church, or a church that happens to be downtown? Which is a powerful question.
That is a powerful question.
And at the time of the explosion, a very decided answer was given to that. We are staying downtown. We need to be downtown. That would have been a time when we could have cut our losses, said, built a modern, accessible building outside of town. We decided to stay downtown. We are a downtown church. The church history that was written at the 150th anniversary is called A Tower on High. We have referred to ourselves as a tower. We have a tower in the church on High Street. We're on High Street, but we intend to be that tower, a reminder of the presence of Christ to the community, and we feel we do it best in downtown Muncie.
How do you capitalize on your downtown location? How do you see yourself, how's your faith community involved in the economic and social change around you?
I think one symbolic but important way is from 8 to 5 every day our doors are open, every weekday. We don't lock our doors. We don't choose who comes in and out of our church. And we have a lot of folks who come in to use our phone, to use our bathrooms.
Do you ever find people asleep?
We have found people. One time we found a blanket up in the balcony where we think somebody had been sleeping.
Sure.
more
Sure.
frequently. We now have, you know, as we've had to do, we have a security system and motion detectors, so that's not going to happen now. But we have programs that reach out to the community. We've always done that. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, talked about loving God with our heart, but with our head, with our hands.
With our feet.
And so we reach out in a lot of ways. We have what we call our Samaritan Fund, where we help people with medical and utility bills. And so twice a month on Tuesday, They call and make appointments, and then they come in, but they don't just get a check. They meet with someone who counsels them, who hears their story, who tries to help them not just with money today, but now what are you going to do when the next bill comes, and here are some other agencies that can help you. Then in the last year or two, we've started having a hot meal available that day. So while
so
they're
when they
waiting
come-
or after they meet with this person walks them to the parlor, there's a hot meal, and there are people who are our listeners who come in. Somebody brings the meal, but others just come to be here
listen.
and to listen. And they sit at that tables down there in the parlor every other Tuesday and listen. And if they can't stay, we have carry-out containers. They can take a meal home with them. So they get more than $50 toward their gas bill.
Do you have any that come just for the food and the fellowship?
We don't now. We don't now. We would like to expand it. We haven't gotten to that point yet. But when they're here for that, that's what we do. And
What are other ways you serve? I don't believe you have a
So,
food pantry.
we have a food pantry.
Oh, you do now.
We've had a food pantry, oh my, I don't know, 50 years. It was called the Pantry Shelf at one time. We're connected to Christian Ministries. So on Monday and Tuesday, the people who go to Christian Ministries in the morning are given a voucher, and they come here from 1:30 to 2:30 to get their food. Our pantry is run the way we've run it for years, in that they get a week's supply of groceries. That we have a standard. They always get meat, they get orange juice, they get eggs, they get staples, they get enough food based on whether it's one person or two people or a family. They walk out of here with enough food to live for a week when they come to the food pantry. So,
What are some of your other specific examples of programs that you've developed to meet the economic needs of the people around us?
we have for many years had hosted the SHIP program. That's a state insurance program. At one time it was for seniors, but now it's for the state. Every Thursday we have at least 3 volunteers here who work with people who have questions about their insurance. For instance, they were overwhelmed, but they did it all at the time when the factories were going out of Muncie, and then when their insurances were changing, and people who had always had their insurance through their business now were told, go find your own insurance. They would hold groups down in the parlor because there were too many people to work with individually, and teach them how to go on the computer or what to do, how to choose. And they don't sell insurance. They don't ever talk about they just tell you what is A, B, C, and people who are on Medicare and then have to choose. We have people who are attorneys, who are in all kinds of professions, who just know the best thing to do is to come in and talk to those people and say, it's time to change my insurance. This is where we are. These are my meds. Now what's the best program? They do that every Thursday. They also are here, people who have a prescription that they can't afford, they get on the phone and call the drug companies and help them find how they can get that medication.
Amazing.
less.
But community members, not necessarily your church
Anybody.
members, but anybody.
Anybody. There
What a
are
great
people
service.
coming from all over, and they're here every Thursday.
Do you advertise this, or does it just?
Well, it's out and about, but not, it's one of those things. You do it so long, you think the word's out there, and it needs to be, it's on some brochures and things that go out. But it's just an incredible. I was leading Thursday luncheon at the time, and they called me from the SHIP office. At that time, it was Senior Health Insurance Information Program. It was just for seniors. Now it's more. And they want to know if they had an office somewhere else in town, and that they were losing that office. And would it be possible for High Street, since we have always been known as advocates, or for 40 years, advocates for older adults, would that be possible for them to meet at High Street? And they really needed more people to take the training to be these counselors. I don't do numbers very well. Insurance, it's all I can do to take care of my own. And when he said, we'd like to come and give a program at Thursday luncheon, and maybe there'd be somebody there who would step up to take this training and become a ship volunteer. I thought, you've got to be kidding me. There is, what person would ever volunteer? They came and gave this program, and we had at least 3, I think, who stepped up and said, I'll take that training. They go to Indianapolis for hours and hours of training. They have huge books that they study. Of course, now a lot of it's online, but we have, right now, one of the women had worked in a doctor's office, one had worked in Social Security, one had been a trust officer. That do that
Numbers.
every Thursday. They do numbers.
Amazing.
When they first started doing it, it was more like, I'm getting all these bills. They called one lady the shoebox lady, because if you were getting bills, you threw them all in a shoebox. Now we'd need a suitcase. And she'd bring them, you'd bring them to her, and she would sort them out and help you know what to do with them. But they still do that. I mean, they'll do whatever. But that's one of our programs. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah,
Then,
it is.
Then years ago, when I was still here, I had an attorney in town who called me, and he said, I am working with families and with seniors in particular who have misunderstood the spend down, and so they're spending all their money in order to know that then they could go on Medicaid when they need to go in a nursing home or whatever. And I wish I had some way to get to them ahead of time to help explain to them how to do this. And he said, I'd like to just come once a month and offer free legal advice in your church. He later changed firms. The firm he was with continued to do this. We still, one Wednesday morning a month, have an attorney here to offer free legal advice to seniors.
Wow, that is a good service too.
So there are those kinds of things that, that are structured, as well as all kinds of informal things when people come in and need help with this or that or the other that we do. Yeah.
With this local Muncie Action Plans by 5 to get all the children ready for kindergarten, you stepped to the plate on that one too, didn't you?
I think so, but
And
I
that's
don't know,
your
that's
new,
the preschool?
your new preschool,
Okay, we're
right.
helping. We have had a preschool for a number of years in the building. But then when the old Muncie Music Center came up for sale, it's the only other thing on the block besides our church, we bought that center. And now our Angels on High preschool is over there. And one of the programs we have is for the kids who aren't quite ready for kindergarten the year they're supposed to go, and they stay on. It's a program, it's private pay, but we also have scholarships so that we try not to turn anybody away, we hope.
Very good.
We have 125 children enrolled in preschool across the parking lot. They use our building, which we think is neat. They come over, they're here but each child, I suppose, is here once a month for chapel, and they go in our chapel.
Okay.
So they have a chapel service there. They were downstairs last week making something for their mothers. They'll have a Mother's Day tea over here. Once or twice a year, they'll come over and help lead our worship service. So we try to be a support to those families and still be connected, even though we're not in the same building. We're just across the parking lot. That's a miracle story over there. We bought that building, and we're going to remodel it for this. Well, as in any time you buy a building, the cost was, oh my, every time you'd go to remodel this, you'd find something else really wrong with it. And then when you're doing children, you know that, Nikki.
Yes.
The state regs were unbelievable. We have to do this, we have to do that. 3 different times we got to a point, can we do this? And a member of the church had died, Willis Stevenson. And one day when we were what are we going to do now? We're going to continue it, or do we have to put it on hold? Her attorney walked in and was working on her estate and handed us a check that covered that amount of money.
Amazing.
We reached another point and a third point, and every single time there was still something else settled from Willis' estate. That building is the Willis Stevenson Center, because her estate paid
Wonderful.
for it to be remodeled and brought up to the code that it is today. And so Willa's legacy of loving children and teaching elementary school and teaching in our nursery lives on in the Willis Stevenson Center, which houses Angels on High preschool.
That is a great story of the providence and what we believe.
Now we're making a big change when we're talking about, well, big for us. We're moving, when the church came, we came back in after the explosion and fire. The nursery and pre-K classes are on the ground floor next to the choir room. The other children's classes are all on the third floor.
And the sanctuary's on the second. So
Or
the
main floor.
basement
There's a
basically
basement,
is
and
your
then there's a
educational
ground- There's a
level.
basement level for the parish hall. Then the ground floor is where the youngest children are and the choir. Then the main level's the sanctuary. Another level, then the third level is where the the kindergarten through fifth grade, sixth grade, depending on when they go to junior high. Well, we are now moving those children from the third floor to the ground floor, so all our children will be on one floor. And that means the choir room has to be moved to the second floor. And all these things are complicated, all that, but it's a study that we did. We were part of a Fruitful Congregation Journey program, and we realized we need all our children on one floor. For one thing, life is different than it used to be. When I would bring my children to church, I would take the baby to the nursery and tell the other two to get to Sunday school, and I didn't worry about them being in the building by themselves. Today, we need to be safer than that. We need to know where they are. Another thing are
Another change.
allergies and such. I help in the nursery once in a while.
Oh.
I'm a nervous wreck. This child can't have peanuts, this child can't have dairy, this child has an EpiPen. Well, when
Right.
we're all on one floor, and we will have a welcome center and a computer, and all of that will be right there, so that whether the child's in this class or has been promoted to this class, it will all be there. Another thing will be, we've always had pagers in the nursery for years, so that the parents anywhere in the building, they can be paged. But this way, the parents will sign their children in, so it will be a safer, plus it'll be remodeled, the whole floor will be welcoming to children. So that's been a big change for us.
Yes. What about any additional programs that you've got in the pipeline?
Oh, gee. We have, what else do we have? Well, we're part of Edible Muncie, our pantry, but Ben and Karen Howells head up Edible Muncie, which is a community program that works with all the pantries and works to deal with food deserts. So much of our city is a food desert where there's not fresh fruits and vegetables available in a store without getting on a bus. And then you take a bus and then you buy your groceries, and you have to be able to carry what you have on the bus and get it off. The bus driver can't help you with that. And so they're just wonderful and working with that. And so we have meetings here working with Edible
Okay.
Muncie. And we're part of Habitat for Humanity. We'll be part of a build in June with that. I was going to look up, it has been called Rebuilding Together Delaware County, but it has a new title now. We've been a part of that. We have a lot of handymen who go out and help. They've built lots of ramps, put roofs on. So we have people who work individually, but groups from our church who go out and do builds like that. Then we have a group within our church called High Streeters Helping High Streeters, where if somebody needs to move, or somebody needs a ramp built, or somebody needs something, they call, and there's a group that will go out and take care of that.
That's kind of fun. So do you work with any other churches or organizations in the community programs, on any of your community programs? You mentioned Christian Ministries.
Christian Ministries.
Is there any other besides them? And you might describe Christian Ministries a little
Christian
bit. We don't want to
Ministries is
assume.
of Delaware County. All the churches of the county work together. There's an office downtown. They do worship services together. Mostly they care for the poor and those who are in need. And we've been a part of that, as so many churches have. We have somebody from our church who's on the board. We help with that in different ways.
What other liaisons do you have with other community organizations?
Community organizations. That's a good question. Of course, Habitat, we are connected to them, and the Rebuild.
And the Edible
and
Muncie.
the Edible Muncie. I may think of something more. Those we do.
Do you do Kids Hope?
With Kids Hope, yes, thank you. We're part of Kids Hope at East Washington Academy.
Mhm.
Denise Smith heads up that program. We've done that for a number of years, where somebody, a team goes every week and relate to kids there. Yeah, that's another one of them. There are, one of my loves, of course, are the older adult programs. And our Update Learning just celebrated 40 years. Thursday Luncheon is like 42 years. And those are community outreaches. There are folks from, so many different churches who come. So every Thursday for I think it's 42 years, there have been older adults here eating lunch together.
With the program?
With
or
a program and
cards
a
or-
full lunch. Oh, no, a full lunch cooked in our kitchen.
All right.
And people from, when I was here and was keeping track, we'd have maybe 30 different churches, as well as folks who aren't in churches, who are here. They come in and they have fellowship, they have a full meal, they have devotional, and then a program. Cost has just gone up to $5. And it's so much fun to look over the variety of folks. And they're all retired, but there are folks, in their early 60s up to in their 90s who come, and the people of the church serve it. The men who wash the dishes almost argue over who gets to come. It's such a fellowship thing out there in the kitchen. My husband would come more often, really, but they don't need him right now. And he comes more when the snowbirds are gone. But and the women who serve it, and the women who help cook it, there's one hired cook, and then there's all these people who help, and it's every week. Incredible interaction that helps. And then again, they are made known of all these, that's one way we get out the word about SHIP and those programs, the free legal advice, because the people who come there know, and then they use it, but they also share it. And so that programming goes on. Then Update Learning, which is our continuing education program that's just celebrated 40 years and now is open to anybody. It's still mostly retired folks because it's on a Monday. 6 Mondays in the spring and 6 Mondays in the fall. And there are up to 40 different classes offered, and you can take up to 4 classes for a total of $8. A total of $8. I didn't come for a little bit after I retired because I didn't think it was fair to the new director for the old director to be here. So I stayed away long enough, and then I started coming as class. For example, this session, I took what we used to call body recall. It's a kind of a sitter-size exercise program. Took that. Then I went upstairs to a class taught by an ethics professor on discrimination. And then I went to an Old Testament class, New Ways of Looking at Old Testament Stories, led by a retired Baptist pastor. And in the afternoon, I took Reader's Theater, led by the director of our Civic Theater. I took all those classes here at High Street. One week at the discrimination class, we had 2 folks who are Muslims, who are both happen to be converts to the Muslim faith, and we talked with them. It's a wonderful, wonderful program, and all that. And those are just 4 of the classes. I mean, there's line dancing, there's knitting, there's crocheting, there's other Bible studies, there's one on cars. My husband loved the cars. He also took photography, and it's just for folks in the community to keep our minds. But again, in those classes, I know there are folks who perhaps didn't even get to finish high school sitting next to a PhD. So we had the most wonderful story writing that was read to celebrate the 40 years. And he talked there about how Update Learning had broken some race barriers that had been there. I mean, so people of color feel comfortable in that program where they might not in other things. I mean, it's a sad state of Muncie, but it's true of the country.
It is true.
That the most segregated hour is that
Sunday morning.
So this is a time when we're much more diverse.
You're
And
reaching out
We
and-
tackle the discrimination of all kinds. We talk about that. We've talked about, well, all kinds of topics.
Mhm.
It's a great program.
So that's a program. How about, what role, if any, do you see the church playing in cultivating a sense of citizenship among their members?
And how do you mean
Well, I mean, like,
citizenship?
Kids Hope, they go out and they help those less fortunate.
Mhm.
In cultivating an idea that they're not coming to church just right here. How do they serve in their community?
Sure. And our mission work area is particularly working hard now on helping us try to find ways to serve, to be a part of the community. Our mission statement for our own church is worship, connect, serve. And when you leave, notice there are stained glass hangings in the entryway out there, and they represent worship, connect, and serve. We worship here, we connect to one another here, but we go forth to serve. And so we serve through Kids Hope, through the pantry, through individual ways that we do, but trying to find more ways as a church community. And so the mission area, that's one of the things they're working on, and working with Edible Muncie and things, not just that this is a High Street program, but how can you connect to other programs. And
So you
So-
see that connection between
Mhm.
faith and citizenship.
And right now, we have lifted up probably in the last couple months, more Sundays than not, our prayers have focused on our Muncie community schools.
That's a good thing to
Because
focus on.
we are so concerned of the dire straits, but also the idea that the schools are in such bad shape, when we know that the most wonderful teachers and wonderful things are happening in our schools,
Mhm.
but we need to support them. We've always had many teachers in our church. We continue
Mhm.
to, and so you know that around you, as you sit on Sunday morning, there are people who are wondering about their jobs, who are feeling underappreciated, who are worrying, and so we lift them up as individuals, and we lift up our schools and our school community, and want to support in whatever ways we can. our
And just for the
schools.
record, since you and I know that Muncie Community Schools right now is in a financially dire straits. Academically, they're still
They're
fabulous.
still fabulous. They're
Good teachers, good instructions, excellent outcomes, but the financial situation has been drained in part because they've lost so many people. And that's kind of what we're getting at with this study.
Mhm. What Muncie has changed in.
Muncie has changed.
In our population. What was it, Nikki? From 20,000 down to less than 6,000 in our
Mhm.
schools.
Yes.
And so, and yet the mayor said last night at the school board meeting that our population of our city isn't changing like that.
Hmm.
To that, we haven't
Mhm.
dropped 1/4. I mean, we aren't 1/4 of where we were. If you go from 20,000 to 6,000, you're talking about we haven't dropped thousands and thousands in our
I
population.
don't know.
Not
I'd have to
that
research.
percentage, yeah.
I don't know. I'd have to research that. But how
So-
about High Street? Have you seen that sort of drop?
Oh, our membership, sure, our membership is
Yeah.
much less than it was, but
For
Not
instance, in
that-
1970s, approximately what was your membership? Can you fathom, like about the time of the explosion?
1,200 maybe.
Mhm,
Yeah,
and-
we're probably at half of what it was.
And
then,
now
I
it's
would
probably at
guess.
600 at
Mhm,
best. And are
mhm.
those active members or?
Well, that's our membership. Our worship would be 350.
So
probably
it's
our
almost
worship.
a quarter.
Well, our membership to membership would probably be half,
Okay. All right.
Mhm.
All right.
so.
We've talked about a lot of things coming in. Did we hit on discipleship and evangelism in the community?
Not by that title. Discipleship would be in our own spiritual growth, and we work with small groups, but we're not a church that is based on small groups. Some churches have a, really active small group
Mhm.
ministry. One thing we found is churches that are older, that have been around a long time like we are, that have a strong Sunday school makeup. We still have I think 5 adult Sunday school
Oh, okay.
classes. They're not as prone to the small group ministry because there already are those fixed groups. We always have small groups going. Pastor Sherry and her husband are always leading at least a small group. Pastor Dale is a wonderful teacher and he teaches, but we don't have the small house groups that some churches have.
I see.
So we have, growing discipleship, but not, and we're working in that area to try to grow that even more.
Well, what about
But
evangelism?
evangelism.
Taking your message, your belief in truth out into the city. Does that happen much?
Probably
how do
more
you do
by
that?
action
Okay.
than word, to taking the love of Christ and being the hands of Christ in the community,
Feet. Mhm.
so that people say, why did you do this?
Yeah.
Why are you here? Not saying you have to do something or whatever. That would be more, just being out there and being the love of Christ.
Okay.
Taking the joy of the Lord. If we aren't a people of joy, then who can be? And if our faith doesn't bring us that joy and that contentment, then why would anybody else want it? The joy of the Lord is my strength. That's my line. And so High Street has challenges, but so does every church. And we're excited we've loved having Pastor Dale here. He's done, goodness, the preschool all happened while he was here, this move with the children. So I think he's gotten things really in place for our new young pastor. First time for a woman senior pastor, first time since I can remember, somebody young with a family as a senior pastor. And so we're bringing her in, and it's another new day.
Ready for a new era. Is there anything else you'd like to add? I think I've asked about all the questions I'm supposed to ask. So is there anything else you'd like to add about churches, communities, the economic impact of what's changed over Muncie as industrialization has left?
I think one of the things we're working on at High Street that I didn't mention is particularly being family ministry, and that doesn't just mean a mom and dad and the 2.5 kids or whatever. To see us as a whole family and intergenerational, and that excites me because working with the older adults, they have so much to give us.
They do.
And the children need that, and so many of the children today don't live near their grandparents.
True.
And so I love, our youth group loves to go with me to Westminster to do Vespers. And they don't just want to help me read the scripture or maybe sing, but they want to go to the nursing home side and visit folks. That's really important. And I think that feeds out in the community. We don't want to just segregate our children to do their things at school or to do what they do here, but to help them see that they're a part of the whole community. And I think the idea of joy, we have to spread the word that Muncie's a great place to live. It's a wonderful place to raise a family. Statistically, it's a great place to age. There's, one of the things we're excited about downtown is the Erskine Green Training Center down at the hotel, the Marriott, and we reach out to them and keep them appraised of what's happening at High Street. And we had one young woman who was here going to the Erskine Green Training Center. She was from Fort Wayne. When she was in Fort Wayne, she volunteered in a church nursery. While she was here at Erskine Green, she attended High Street and she volunteered in our nursery. So that's
excellent.
So I appreciate your stopping by and letting me sing the praises of our Lord and the way He works through High Street Church.
Magnificent things that happen. Well, thank you so much, Charlotte.
Thank you, Nikki.